Some people are invisible. They are the background characters in the movie of your life. The person who scans your groceries, the janitor in your office building, the man who drives your bus. You see them every day, but you never really see them. For the passengers of Route 7, that man was Frank. Frank was a bus driver. That's what he was. Not who he was, but what he was. To the world, his identity was a blue uniform, a pair of tired eyes, and the number of the bus he drove. His life was a loop, a repeating circle of cracked asphalt and dirty city streets played out inside a rumbling metal box of misery. Every morning, he would begin his route, and the world would begin its daily assault on his soul. The bus was a magnet for the city's small, casual cruelties. A mother with a stroller would yell at him for not lowering the ramp fast enough. A businessman, late for a meeting, would curse him for hitting a red light, as if Frank personally controlled the flow of traffic. Teenagers would blast music from their phones, their eyes daring him to say a word. And Frank? He never said a word. He was a silent shock absorber for the city's frustrations. He would sit behind the giant steering wheel, his face a neutral mask, and just take it. He would watch the angry faces in his rearview mirror, listen to the shouted insults, and absorb it all into the quiet, vast emptiness inside him. The other drivers at the depot saw him as a loser, a man with no ambition, no spine. Old Frank, they'd say, with a pitying smirk, lets everyone walk all over him. They didn't understand his silence. They mistook his stillness for weakness. They saw a man who had surrendered to the world. To the passengers, he was less than a person. He was a function, a part of the machine. They would complain about the heat in the summer and the cold in the winter. They will leave their trash on the seats and their muddy footprints on the floor. They never said thank you. They never looked them in the eye. He was just the driver. What they didn't see, what no one saw, was the quiet, unbreakable resolve behind his tired eyes. They didn't see the calloused hands on the steering wheel, hands that were strong enough to carry a weight far heavier than their daily insults. They saw a man going nowhere, driving a bus in endless circles. They had no idea he was on the most important journey of his life. A journey to a destination so beautiful it would have broken their cynical hearts. A destination he was building, dollar by painful dollar, insult by patient insult. But for now, he was just Frank, the invisible man, the loser behind the wheel, and another long, thankless day was just beginning. Frank's apartment was like him, quiet, unassuming, and easy to overlook. A small, one-bedroom unit on the fourth floor of a walk-up building that had seen better decades. The furniture was old and functional. There were no decorations on the walls, no signs of a life lived for pleasure. It was the space of a man who saw his home not as a comfort, but as a necessity, a place to recharge before the next shift. But in this sparse, monastic room, there was one thing that was full of life. On a small, cheap wooden desk in the corner, under the light of a single lamp, sat a large, beautifully detailed architectural model. It was a model of a building, a sprawling two-story structure with wide windows, a playground with miniature swings, and a small, lovingly crafted garden. It looked like a school or a large, welcoming home. This was Frank's secret, his real life's work. Every night, after a 12-hour shift of absorbing the city's noise and anger, he would sit at this desk. He wouldn't turn on the TV. He wouldn't read a paper. He would work. He had taught himself how to read blueprints. He had spent hours at the public library, studying books on construction, on zoning laws, on how to run a nonprofit. Next to the model was a thick, worn ledger. Inside, in neat, precise columns, was a record of his entire life's savings. Every paycheck, every overtime hour, meticulously documented. And next to the income column was the expense column. It was always brutally, painfully short. Cheap canned soup, discount bread, bus fare. He never used his driver's pass for personal trips. The bare minimum to survive. Every spare dollar, every single cent he could save went into a separate account. An account whose name was written at the top of the ledger's first page. The Haven Project. No one knew that the quiet, loser bus driver was a master of finance, a student of architecture, and the secret benefactor of a dream. A dream of a place where children who had no one would be safe. A shelter for orphans. A haven. He never spoke of it. To speak of it would be to expose it to the cynicism of the world. It was a fragile, sacred thing built in the silence of his lonely apartment, funded by a lifetime of quiet sacrifice. Sometimes, late at night, he would hold a small, faded photograph. It was the only picture he owned, a picture of a smiling little boy with Frank's own eyes, his son, lost to a fever when he was only 6, decades ago, a lifetime ago. Before Frank's wife had left, unable to live in a house so full of silence and grief. He wasn't just building a home for orphans. He was building the home he never got to give his own son. Every brick in that model was a memory. Every window was a hope. He would look at the model, then at the numbers in the ledger. He was close. After 30 years of driving, of saving, of being invisible, he was finally close. Just a few more years, a few more shifts, a few more insults to absorb. He would put the photograph away, turn off the lamp, and go to sleep for a few short hours before his alarm would ring, signaling the start of another day on Route 7. Another day of being the man the world saw, the failure, the nobody. He was a king, secretly building his castle in the dark, and he was content to let the world think he was just a peasant, driving in circles.
The day it happened started like any other, a sky the color of a dirty dish rag, and the familiar grinding groan of the bus's engine coming to life in the pre-dawn chill. Frank did his routine pre-trip inspection, his movements automatic, honed by thousands of identical mornings. The first few hours of the shift were the usual symphony of urban misery. The morning rush, a crush of bodies and sour moods, an argument between 2 passengers over a seat, a kid spilling a sticky soda on the floor. Frank navigated it all with his usual stoic silence, his face an unreadable mask, his eyes on the road. By mid-bay, the sky had taken on a strange, sickly yellow-orange hue. A faint, acrid smell, like burning plastic, began to creep into the air. Passengers coughed and commented on it. "Smog's bad today," one said. "Probably just a dumpster fire," said another. But Frank knew it was something more. He had seen skies like this on the news, in pictures of distant wildfires. An unnatural twilight in the middle of the day, a subtle, primal wrongness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He turned a corner, and his route took him towards the eastern hills, a dense wooded area that bordered the poorer, more neglected side of the city. And that's when he saw it. It wasn't just a plume of smoke, it was a wall. A colossal, churning cloud of black and gray that was devouring the horizon, blotting out the already weak sun. At its base, he could see a terrifying, pulsing orange glow. It was a wildfire, and it was moving with an unnatural speed, propelled by the hot, dry winds that had been plaguing the city for weeks. His radio crackled to life, a panicked voice from dispatch, broken and distorted by static. "All units, avoid the east sector. Fire is out of control. Repeat, all units, reroute, evacuate." Frank stopped the bus. The passengers, finally sensing the gravity of the situation, were crowding the windows, their faces pale with fear. They were murmuring, a low hum of anxiety that was quickly escalating towards panic. They were on the edge of the evacuation zone, on a road that led directly towards the fire. Frank's training, his protocol, was clear. Turn the bus around, head west, away from the danger, get himself to safety. He looked in his rearview mirror. He saw the faces of his passengers, the same people who had ignored him, insulted him, treated him like a piece of furniture. He saw the mother who had yelled at him that morning, now clutching her child, her face a mask of terror. He saw the businessman, his important meeting forgotten, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't control. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were people, trapped, frightened, and he was their driver. He looked ahead down the road that led into the growing darkness. He knew those streets. It was a labyrinth of old, narrow roads, a neighborhood of low-income housing and retirement homes, a place where many people didn't have cars, a place where people would be trapped, a place the emergency services, already overwhelmed, might not reach in time. He thought of the model on his desk, the Haven, a place to keep the vulnerable safe. It wasn't just a building made of wood and glue. It was a promise he had made to his son, to himself. The dispatcher's voice was still crackling on the radio, ordering him to retreat. Frank picked up the receiver. He said, "This is Bus 7. His voice was calm, steady, and clear, with an authority no one on that bus had ever heard from him before. "I'm not turning around. I'm going in." He switched off the radio, cutting off the panicked protests from the other end. He turned the key in the ignition, and he drove the bus forward, directly into the smoke, directly towards the fire. The moment the bus lurched forward toward the smoke, a wave of panic and disbelief erupted among the passengers. "Hey, where are you going?" a man shouted from the back. "The fire's that way, you idiot! Turn around!" "He's crazy!" a woman screamed. "Stop the bus! Let us out!" The bus filled with a chorus of angry, terrified shouts. They surged towards the front, their faces contorted with fear and rage, seeing Frank not as a savior, but as a madman driving them to their deaths. Frank ignored them. He was in a different zone now, a place of pure, cold focus he hadn't visited in decades. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes scanning the road ahead as they plunged into the thick, choking smoke. The world outside the windows dissolved into a swirling orange-gray hell. Ash began to rain down on the windshield like dirty snow. He hit the intercom switch, his voice booming through the cabin, cutting through the panic. "Everybody, sit down." The command was so sharp, so filled with an absolute, unquestionable authority, that a stunned silence fell over the bus. This was not the voice of the meek, invisible driver they knew. This was the voice of a general. "I know those streets," Frank's voice continued, calm and steady, a rock in the storm of their fear. "There are people back there who can't get out. Retirement homes, families without cars. We're going to get them. Now sit down, stay low, and cover your mouths." No one argued. They retreated to their seats, their fear now mixed with a dawning, confused sense of awe. They watched the shadowy figure behind the wheel as he expertly navigated the bus through the blinding smoke, making turns onto streets they didn't even know existed. He drove with a purpose they couldn't comprehend. He wasn't just driving a bus. He was commanding a rescue vessel through a sea of fire. He pulled up to a small, low-income apartment building where dozens of residents were stranded on the street, watching the approaching flames with helpless terror. He swung the doors open. "Get on," he roared. "Hurry, there's no time." They scrambled on, their faces streaked with soot and tears, coughing, crying, their eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it was painful to watch. He waited until the last one was on, then plunged back into the smoke. He did it again at a nursing home, helping the elderly and infirm up the steps, himself, his arms surprisingly strong and his movements patient and gentle. The bus was no longer a bus, it was an ark. It was packed to the brim with the city's forgotten and vulnerable cross-section of humanity. The heat inside the cabin was becoming unbearable. The air was thick and hard to breathe. The fire was no longer a distant glow,
It was a living, breathing monster roaring just outside the windows. Flames licked at the sides of the bus, and the tires groaned under the extreme heat. Frank's face was covered in soot, his eyes red and streaming from the smoke. But he never wavered. He kept his foot on the gas, his hand steady on the wheel. He had one last stop to make. The old children's home on the edge of the woods, the one that was scheduled for closure, the one that had been the original inspiration for his own Haven project. He pushed the struggling bus up the final hill. Through the swirling embers, he could see the building, and he could see the small group of children and their two caregivers huddled together near the road, their small faces turned towards the inferno. They were trapped. He had made a promise to his son, a promise to keep children safe. And Frank, he always kept his promises. He was going to get his kids.
The heat inside the bus was now a physical presence, a suffocating blanket that stole the breath from their lungs. The windows began to crack and craze from the thermal shock, the world outside turning into a fractured, fiery mosaic. Panic was once again beginning to set in as the passengers realized their metal ark was quickly becoming an oven. But Frank was a man possessed by a singular, unwavering purpose. He brought the groaning, overheating bus to a stop in front of the children's home. The small group of kids and their caregivers ran towards them, their faces illuminated by the terrifying, dancing light of the approaching firestorm. The bus doors hissed open, and the last of the refugees scrambled aboard. Frank helped the last child up the steps, a small girl who couldn't have been more than 6, her face streaked with tears and soot. For a single, fleeting moment, her terrified eyes met his. And in that moment, she wasn't just another passenger. She was every child he had ever dreamed of saving. "It's okay," he said, his voice a hoarse, gentle whisper. "You're safe now." He pointed her towards the back of the bus and climbed back into the driver's seat. He was done. He had everyone. The ark was full. Now all he had to do was get them through the fire and back to the safety of the city. He slammed the door shut and stomped on the accelerator. The engine screamed in protest. The tires, half melted and losing their integrity, struggled for purchase on the superheated asphalt. But the bus moved. It was a lumbering, wounded beast, but it was moving. They were driving through the heart of the inferno now. The world was nothing but a roaring, blinding orange. Trees exploded into flames on either side of the road. The sound was a deafening, continuous roar. The sound of the world being unmade. Inside the bus, people were praying, crying, holding on to each other. They were no longer strangers. They were a single, terrified family, their lives held in the hands of the silent man behind the wheel. Frank could feel his skin blistering from the heat radiating through the windshield. The smoke in the cabin was so thick he could barely see the road in front of him. He was driving on memory alone, his body screaming in agony, his lungs on fire. But his hands never left the steering wheel. His foot never left the gas pedal. He thought of the ledger on his desk, the neatly written columns, the final sum he was so close to reaching. He thought of the beautiful model of the Haven, the playground, the garden, the home he would never see built. And he smiled. A small, sad, peaceful smile that no one saw. He had spent his whole life saving money to build a shelter. He had never imagined that in the end, his shelter wouldn't be made of brick and mortar, but of steel and glass, and that he would have to pay for it not with his savings, but with his life. Through a gap in the flames, he saw it. The bridge. The bridge that crossed the ravine and led back to the main highway, back to safety. It was less than a quarter of a mile away. He pushed the bus harder, demanding one last effort from the dying machine. The engine sputtered. The electronics flickered. A small lick of flame erupted from the dashboard. He knew he wasn't going to make it. But they were. The bus, now a moving fireball, finally reached the beginning of the bridge. It coasted forward, its own momentum carrying it across. It was going to make it to the other side. The passengers felt the bus begin to slow. They saw Frank, his uniform now smoldering, slump forward over the steering wheel. He had gotten them to the bridge. He had gotten them out. His job was done. The bus finally rolled to a stop halfway across the bridge, a blackened, smoking monument filled with the living. Safe. Outside, the fire roared. Inside, the only sound was the weeping of the people Frank had saved. The Invisible Man had just performed his final, most magnificent disappearing act. The story of Bus 7 became a legend in the city. In a time of widespread tragedy, it was a single, defiant story of hope. The tale of the ordinary, silent bus driver who had turned his bus into an ark and driven it through the gates of hell to save over 60 people, the elderly, the poor, the children, was on every news channel. Frank was no longer invisible. He was a hero. His grainy employee photo was everywhere. The face of a man no one had ever bothered to look at before, now gazed upon with reverence and awe by millions. The passengers he had saved told their stories, their voices thick with emotion and a profound, shattering guilt. "He was always just the driver," said the businessman, his voice breaking. "We treated him like he was part of the bus, like he wasn't even there, and he died for us." The mother who had yelled at him that morning was inconsolable. "I never even learned his name," she wept. "He saved my baby, and I never even said thank you." Frank had no living family. He was a ghost in the city's records, a man who had lived and died in quiet solitude. The city's mayor, delivering a public eulogy, spoke of him as a symbol of the city's spirit, a testament to the fact that heroes could be found anywhere. It was a beautiful speech, but it was based on a man they didn't know at all. The real story, the final heartbreaking piece of the puzzle, was discovered by a low-level clerk in the city planning office, tasked with handling Frank's non-existent estate. There wasn't much. A small, almost empty bank account, a sparsely furnished apartment, and a box. Inside the box was the architectural model, the faded photograph of a little boy, and the worn, meticulously kept ledger. The clerk, confused, passed the box up to her superiors. It eventually landed on the mayor's desk. The mayor, a man accustomed to dealing with budgets and politics, sat alone in his office late one night, flipping through the pages of the old bus driver's ledger. He saw the decades of saving, the brutally Spartan lifestyle, and the name of the project that had consumed a man's entire life, the Haven Project. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a formal proposal, written with a clarity and passion that stunned him. It was a fully realized plan to build and fund a state-of-the-art nonprofit group home for orphaned children. It was filled with research, with cost projections, with a deep, profound understanding of what a broken child needed to feel safe. The proposed location for the shelter was a plot of unused city land, the very same plot of land where the old, fire-damaged children's home, the last stop on Route 7, now stood in ruins. The mayor leaned back in his chair, the scale of the man's quiet, epic life finally hitting him with the force of a physical blow. Frank wasn't just a hero for one day. He had been a hero every single day for 30 years. Every time he endured an insult, every time he ate a cheap meal, every time he put another dollar into that account, he was performing an act of quiet, unseen heroism. He wasn't just driving a bus. He was building a sanctuary with his own silent sacrifice. He hadn't died driving people away from a fire. He had died driving them to the very thing he had been trying to build his entire life: a haven. The next morning, the mayor held a press conference. He held up the ledger, his voice thick with an emotion that was not for the cameras. He said, "We thought we knew the story of Frank. We knew he was a hero who gave his life for others, but we knew nothing." He announced that the city would not just be honoring Frank's dream, they would be building it. The Haven Project would be funded, built on the exact spot he had chosen, a permanent testament to the quiet bus driver no one knew. Frank never got to see his home built, but in the end, his story built it for him. The Invisible Man, the quiet failure from Route 7, had finally reached his destination.